Hi, Don. Thank you for coming to the Athlete Highlight. I wanted to start by asking you how you started running and a little bit about your background.
Um, I was not athletic as a kid. I was a not very good soccer player and a truly terrible baseball and softball player, like play coach pitch and strike out. And but I love the outdoors and like catching snakes and salamanders and frogs, and eventually got interested in canoes and camping and stuff. And I guess in college, be like the late 80s, I discovered rock climbing and whitewater kayaking and mountain biking and just got totally hooked on all of those things, especially whitewater, but not running. Running was like, we didn't even do running to train for those things. It was just like nothing appealing about it. Um, so fast forward maybe to 2005, I was doing seabird ecology research on this little island near Hawaii. The island's like half a mile long and maybe 200 yards wide. And two other scientists there talked me into doing this kind of self-imposed triathlon. The island had this rubble runway down the middle, and we had two of these like beat up, rusted single speed bikes with coaster brakes. Um, there were only two bikes and there were three people, so we had to do different people had to do the events in different orders. Um, it was like swim the half-mile length of the island. They're like these totally unimpressed sharks, just like, and then ride 10 laps back and forth on this crushed coral runway on a bike. The seat post was rusted, stuck low. So it was like Kermit the Frog with my knees going up, by my face, and then run 5 laps. And the whole thing for me was just a total sufferfest. Um, but it gave me a sense of possibility, at least. Um,
And the sharks didn't eat you?
Sharks didn't eat us. And so then a couple years later, I guess I decided I could run enough to do this thing in West Virginia called the Captain Thurman's Challenge, which was, it's in the New River Gorge, the place that I had spent all this time climbing and doing whitewater and some mountain biking. And so the race is a chunk of single track mountain bike and then paddle the gorge, which is, I don't know, sort of
Wow.
class 3, 4 whitewater, and then a trail run that's mostly uphill out of the gorge. And I it seemed like running was the price you had to pay for getting to race those other parts. It sort of felt that way for everybody in the race. Like they were mostly boaters and mountain bikers, and they would all complain about the running and hate the running, and they weren't runners. So I did that race for, I don't know, maybe 4 years. I never loved the run, but it got a little less bad. And so then I started doing some short triathlons and road running off and on. And then in 2017, I did a 20-mile relay leg at the first year they had the Riverlands 100 here in Maine. And I was just blown away by the community of trail runners. So that, I think that I still was kind of ambivalent about running, it was just amazing people who loved wilderness and did these crazy hard things, but didn't take themselves too seriously. And they were welcoming instead of
Yeah.
competitive or standoffish. And they secretly love being wet and muddy and beat up. And
And
um,
salamanders?
yeah. They love, like, they tolerate me talking about birds and salamanders and things when we're out running, and they ask questions and ask me to identify things. And um, it was just super fun. So I guess I did my first 50K in 2018, and I long trail run things are just still rewarding and a little scary and amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Trail running community is amazing.
it's amazing. The
Yeah.
people, and when I was doing some triathlons, I did some road cycling with a club, and it's I, not to knock on road cyclists, but it's a different vibe than trail runners. The
It
trail running
is.
community is just, they're people who are pushing themselves, and yet they're super laid back, and it's not fake laid back. Like they're just I
like a
know
bunch
there's
of wild
something,
animals,
right?
kind of in some ways.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
So, what's been your favorite part about trail running?
I like getting out into wildernessy places. Obviously, I like the community and the people. I love being above tree line. In the east, there are not a ton of places where you can do that, but we
Yeah,
happen to live, you know, a few
we're
hours away
lucky.
from the lights. It's a you have to put in some work to get up and to get down, sadly. But yeah, I love being able to. I love training enough that I'm capable of going and spending sort of all day in the mountains. Um, and my job is a lot and kind of stressful, and it demands a lot intellectually, but doesn't demand anything physically. And being out of balance that way, I finally realized isn't good for me. I sleep best and sort of feel most fulfilled if my brain's tired and my body's tired. And so running really gives me that second part. And it's an
Yeah,
uncomplicated, I miss whitewater and climbing terribly. I don't do those things now, but running is simple enough that I can run from work or from the house or from wherever I happen to be. Uh, so yeah, it's good that way.
much lower risk than the other two sports too.
Yeah, though I think I liked the risk, not in a like adrenaline junkie way, but
Yeah,
I could get onto a hard river, and because there are consequences, the focus is just so complete. You have to pay
yeah.
attention, or you might wind up dead. Then, suddenly 5 hours have gone by and you haven't thought about any of the things that were worrying you. Running, sometimes I get in that kind of flow state, but often I ruminate about things.
Yeah.
Whitewater and climbing, both whitewater especially, just kind of shoved all of that stuff to the side.
Yeah. Yeah, the climbing, that was I've done some of that, and that was the part I liked about the climbing was how all you're focused on is the moment.
Yeah.
Or running, you're in I find above tree line, you're more in the moment because once you pop up and have
Yes.
those views, oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah.
And the
And trail
rocks make you think.
Yes, right. Right. It's, um, I guess trail running is not quite as much this way as climbing and boating, but it's like physical problem solving.
Yeah.
And so you've got to think through a sequence of moves, or what, you know, what the water's doing, or what that part of the climbing route is really going to be like, or which of those rocks are going to move when you step on them, and how far apart are they,
Yes.
and where's your foot going to come down at this pace. And
Welcome to the White Mountains.
yeah, yeah.
So what kind of challenges have you faced during your training?
Balance with the rest of my life is probably the biggest one. I really value being present with and for my family. My job's kind of relentless. I've got other hobbies I like to do, so fitting it all in is tough. And there are a lot of days where I don't feel like exercising. I certainly know people who have that itch to run, and if like they are just wanting to run, and I don't always feel that way. I don't often feel that way, but I always feel much better afterwards. So finding time. I guess the other is, and maybe this goes back to my childhood sports things. I have trouble thinking of myself as a runner or as an athlete. Um, I'm comfortable owning that label of outdoorsy guy, but I would be quick to say or to think that I'm not a real runner or not a real athlete. Um,
Come on now, if you run, you're an
really,
athlete. You're a runner. You're an athlete.
I sort of like my response to that is, well, I guess. When I played soccer on this like city league for, I don't know, probably a lot of years when I was a kid, and one year at some end of the season banquet, I got a trophy for determination. At the time, I think it just seemed sort of like fine, like whatever. And then some years later, I was like, oh, that's really embarrassing. That's like the coach saying, son, I wish you would quit the team. This is not your sport. And then years after that, probably when I was in my 30s, I was like, heck yeah, I got a trophy for determination. That is like behind all the things that I've been able to do is like, you just keep doing it. So, running is interesting that way. Like, even when it's not going well, you just keep going, and it's not always going to keep getting worse in a long event. It's hard to remember the way things might turn around eventually, but
They do.
yeah, but they do.
So what was your best race experience?
One that comes to mind is a couple years ago I did the 50 miler at Run Rabbit Run, and it's got some altitude, and my stomach went bad partway through, and so I just kind of came apart a little before halfway, and so it was a lot of walking and just feeling just in a bad headspace and chasing cutoffs. And coming in towards the last aid station, I was kind of in a strung out line with other people who were also just having a really awful time. The sort of the mental vibe of that group was terrible, and it was getting dark, and I was just sort of resigned to, like, I was not going to finish in time, but I was hoping that I could just keep walking and maybe at least do the distance. And we got into the Mount Warner aid station. This guy who was one of the struggling runners was like, he tried to rally the group. He was like, we can make this. He's like looking at his watch, doing the math. He's like, we can get there, and it's mostly downhill. And I was like, I'm with you. And we started running, and I just like, I found another mental gear and just
Yeah.
started tearing down the hill. And at some point I looked around, and like, he was like gone, dropped way back behind me. I was just like, and it just kind of stormed into the finish, the last 6 miles or something. And it was just, I wasn't fast. I was still near the end, but I made it under the cutoff, and just that
Yeah,
feeling of bouncing back was just super cool.
that's
Yeah.
huge to be able to turn it around. I think that's the
Yeah.
biggest accomplishment you can make in a race is going to that dark place, not being sure, and then whatever that switch is in your mind, you
Yeah.
just become superhero. You're like, "I've got
Yeah.
this."
Right. Right.
You're
Another
gonna
good
need
one
that
was,
for
yeah, that feeling of, well, so this year in the Riverlands Relay, I've done it a bunch of years, but this year was maybe 4 months after I started working with you, and I hadn't done a race, and I've been doing all this low heart rate work, and I didn't really know what I would be capable of. And so I started kind of pushing in that race, and suddenly discovered that I had more of an engine than I had had, and was just I was just giddy, just kind of flying along. And it just kind of kept looking at my watch, thinking, "Am I really moving at this speed still? That doesn't that's probably not right." So yeah, that kind of that I don't know, enthusiasm, buoyancy, whatever feeling is just super fun.
It is, and that's, like, a really fun part of running too, is, like, you hit this low, and then you come out of it, and it's just everything's magic, or if you have one of those runs where you're like, "Is this really me running?"
Yeah.
So what'd you
Yeah.
say your toughest training experience was, and what are those voices going on in your head when that happens?
Oof, the voices. Yeah, the voices are there. I'm going to cheat and say my toughest training experience was probably a race. Um, 2 years ago, I DNF'd 100K on the Gaspé Peninsula in New Brunswick. I was maybe 45 miles in, though I quit earlier than that. but kept going. I decided to quit earlier than that. I hurt my back and it was just mud. It was super muddy. My back had been hurt off and on going in, and I fell and my back kind of spasmed and it just kind of got worse and worse. So I learned some, it was a mentally brutal day for me. But I learned some good lessons about making little deals with yourself about moving forward, being disciplined about eating, which I had sort of failed at in that race, um, dealing early with getting cold. Um, I think like most people with the DNFs, I still wonder about whether it was the right call. Um, but it also motivated me to deal with a chronic injury. Um, but that I didn't solve the I I I wasn't able to figure out the negative self-talk issue. I still can't. It's the voices are saying this is hard, I should just stop. Um, why bother? This is in training, the voices are like, wouldn't it be okay to shorten this run or to walk this part, or like the shortening, it's easier having a coach for sure. If it's a self-imposed distance or time, then man, like from the first few steps, it's a struggle to want to do all of it. During a race and a long race, it's usually, this is impossibly far. I feel terrible already. I shouldn't feel this bad this early. There's no way I can do this. And so that often starts like a third of the way in, which is, I'm not physically at my limit yet, but I'm convinced that I'm going to hit it soon because of how I'm feeling now.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I
I
don't have an answer to those.
I think that's a normal part in the race where people start having doubts is closer to the beginning, and
Hmm.
then you kinda go to the dark place, and then you come out of it, and you're, like, ecstatic when you know you're gonna finish, but, yeah, our voices in our heads are our worst enemies, but they can be our best friend too.
Well, and
Yeah.
you were talking earlier before this conversation about how other people in a race are suffering and the front runners are suffering, and I think that's a thing too. Is in my head is like, am I the only one that feels this terrible? Am I like all these other people? They're just cruising along. They're running so smoothly. They look so together. They've kind of they've got their act together. They've done the work. They whatever. So it's easy to look at them and decide that I'm the underprepared one, the one that's not an athlete, the one that shouldn't be there, and then just think, oh, I'm not going to be able to finish this.
Yeah. Being a race director, you learn very quickly that every single person in the race has the same doubts and challenges, no matter where they place. It's normal. So have you dealt with injuries and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, I don't think I've had more injuries than most people. I have a couple of old injuries, one of them not from running, like years and years, decades old, that I wish I'd taken seriously at the time. I think I could have had better outcomes with them. Um, More recently, I've had kind of some persistent low back issues that I've um, dealt with through strength training. I had a rotator cuff injury from a surfing, that I've been working on with strength training. I have a rib injury from a fall on the Osceolas. I'm dealing with mostly with being patient. But for the back and the rotator cuff both, I worked with Kelton Kellenberg at Steady State, and that was just amazing to be treated like an athlete. There's back to
Yeah.
sort of how do I self-identify, like where the goal was not like
Yeah.
to get you back to being able to get out of your chair, but like let's get you to where you can deadlift, twice your body weight. What?
Yeah,
What?
they're
My
amazing
back can't do
there.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely
So
like
I, you know, I think my body holds up okay, if I treat it well, and certainly the strength training proactively is just so valuable. I need to stay disciplined about that.
yeah, because you don't wanna become a decrepit old man. You can prevent
Right.
that with strength training.
Right.
Kelton will tell you that too.
Yes. Yep.
So what are your future goals?
The closest future goal is Jigger Johnson, the 50 miler that's coming up in just a few weeks.
Somebody wants
Um,
to suffer.
boy, it's you know, in its particular way, that'll be the hardest thing I've done. Not the longest, but close, and just brutal terrain. But more hiking than running. So as long as anyway, so that I just want to get that done under cutoffs. Along with some nutty friends of mine, we're going to try to do the 100-mile wilderness next summer in a single push.
Awesome.
Any race that takes me to sort of wild places that I haven't been before. I'd love going to new mountains and backcountry places. And I've started kind of ineptly fly fishing, and so combining a long mountain run with fishing in the middle of nowhere is a fun thing that I think will keep kind of pulling me into different parts of the mountains.
Montana.
Yeah, boy, yes, yeah, and that's a little like in the whites. It's like, you know, brook trout that are, you know, small enough you could keep them in an aquarium at home. Yeah, getting out west would be really fun.
Yeah. And what has your experience been like working with me?
Oh gosh, it's just great, fantastic. You're so positive. That's your positivity is really infectious. Um, the low heart rate training took some getting used to, because it wasn't a way I trained before, and I suspect that most of my prior mileage had been kind of in the mushy middle in terms of effort, you know, sort of too high for effective and gentle aerobic training, and too low for effective intervals. So having this structure is great. Um, the fact that you know the terrain I'm training for, you're both a jigger and in the 100-mile wilderness, is just super helpful, because it means I can trust that you're giving me workouts to get me ready for it. Um, the core work and strength training is amazing. It can be a lot to find time for, but the benefits are not just for running, but for other activities I like to do. And as you alluded to, I'm getting to an age where I need to think about maintaining muscle mass and bone density and all that. So having strength work as a habit is a good thing in all those ways. Um, and you understand the need to balance training with all the other things in my life, and somehow you provide that mix of, you provide accountability but not judgment. I don't really know how that works, but it's what I need.
Yeah, it's important. And
Yeah.
lastly, for anyone that's just starting out, what would your advice be?
Um, Two things, I guess. One is find your community, engage with them. That, you know, there'll be a reason to show up on the days you don't feel like it. But maybe more importantly, even as an introvert, I could say that you build a set of running friends that are just a huge source of joy.
Yeah.
The other is run for your own reasons and define success your own way. It took me, I don't know, it took me a lot of years to really come to grips with the fact that I could feel great about how I did in a race right up until I looked at other people's results. And then I would feel bad about where I was. Like, if I had such a good race, if I felt so good, then like I couldn't reconcile that with being that far in the back of the pack. Um, or wherever I was in the pack, it almost sort of didn't matter. Even if I had a race where I was in, a good race for me might have been a quarter of the way back. Like, I don't have control over who those people are or what they're doing or what gifts they have or how much work they put in. And that shouldn't, I don't know. I'm like, we're all competitive in some ways, but I decided that that part of it wasn't good for me. So just last year, I decided to, this was easier said than done. I decided to stop looking at race results. And so instead of writing down, like I had a spreadsheet where I would like, write down my time and my finish place and my age group place. And so now I write down my time and then 3 memorable moments or experiences or something for the race, and I just don't look.
That's
Um,
awesome.
so I'm not saying it's bad to be competitive, and racing still motivates me in a way that just going out and running on my own doesn't. But so I guess what the advice distills to is just figure out what aspects of running make you happy and don't let somebody else define that for you.
That's amazing advice.
Hard to follow for me.
Yeah, very
Maybe,
it's
maybe
hard for
for a lot of
everyone to
people.
follow. I think for most people because it's a race, but,
Yeah,
to be okay with your finish and just be psyched, like, "Did I have a good day?"
yeah,
Yes or no, that's a lot easier to understand, and that's all it is, having fun,
yeah.
and I think you're doing a good job of that.
It's
Well
it helps be surrounded by good people.
awesome. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much for meeting with me, and I think you have a lot of good advice for people.
yeah, totally. Thank you. Thanks for the
You're welcome.
coaching and thanks for the chance to talk about it.